Beth. Thank you so much for joining me here today and agreeing to be interviewed for my channel.
No problem. Happy to be here.
First, to get started, can you tell me about your MS diagnosis? Whatever you feel comfortable with sharing.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I was diagnosed back in 2016, so it's only been about almost 7 years now. So I just moved to Halifax. I'm a nurse, so I just moved to Halifax and started a new job, and I started to have some numbness and tingling in my feet. And I was like, this is weird. So I went to a walk-in and they were like, we don't know what it is. And then it got worse. It started like on the inside of my feet and then went to my entire foot and then started moving its way up my legs. And I was like, this is weird. So I went to another walk-in and then they were like, we don't know what it is. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, but you should go to the ER to get it checked out. So spent whole night in the ER. That was fun. They were like, we don't know what it is. And I'm like, was really worried that it was like this other condition. And then they're like, no, not that. And I'm like, okay, cool. It's MS. I have a huge family history of MS. All of my on my mother's side, all of my great aunts and uncles, except for my grandfather, like all of his siblings, have MS. And
Oh,
then on my
wow.
dad's side, yeah, I know, right? And then
Wow.
on my dad's side, there's I have another great aunt who has MS, and then I have a cousin who's not her son who also has MS. So I was like, well, this is clearly what it is.
Yeah.
So took about a month for me to get really seen and believed. There was a lot of back and forth. So I'm originally from New Brunswick, but I was living in Nova Scotia at the time. However, I luckily have a really amazing family doctor who saw me in New Brunswick, and like was immediately like, so everyone else like here in Nova Scotia was good, but they were like, well, we don't know, and walk-in clinics just like they just take everything you say with a grain of salt. So I went to my family doctor and he was like, no, this is probably MS. And I was like, right? And so I saw a neurologist within a week, got an MRI in that same week. And then that neurologist was able to connect with neurologists here in Halifax and got me treated. So, good old LP, all the blood work. Oh, sorry, for those of you who don't know, a lumbar puncture. So I had a lumbar puncture, and then I had a lot of blood work done. And of course, because I was in an active, what they consider relapse, I had IV steroids. Those didn't work great for me for some reason. Well, I should say that on my worst day, I had no feeling or very little feeling from my bra line down and in either of my wrists from to my arms, like down my hands. Like I couldn't, from elbow to wrist, like to fingertips, I couldn't feel much. And I'd also lost vision in my left eye. So all I could see was dark and light. Right?
Yeah.
It's a pretty common thing actually with
Yeah.
MS.
Yeah.
A lot of people have vision issues like that. It's referred to as optic neuritis. So now, sorry, I'll finish that first. So then I also had, because of the IV steroids not working great for me, they gave me oral steroids as well. And I also had apheresis, which is kind of like dialysis, but a little bit easier. So I had some of that as well. And that seemed to work a little bit better for me. Or maybe it was just the time. Who knows? But anyways, so after about 2 months, I did officially get diagnosed here and came up with relapsing remitting MS. So that's kind of how that all started. And then I got put on Tysabri. It's an IV drug that I get once a month. And I've been on that ever since. Doing really well. Sorry, a little superstitious about it. Like I said, I do have a little bit residual vision issues. So my left eye is what we consider optic neuritis. So I still don't see well out of that. My brain pretty much just ignores it because everything's just like a little bit more dull and it's pretty blurry. My brain just ignores it. My right eye's fine, and that is good enough vision for everything that I need to do. So I'm pretty fortunate that that's most of my effects. Like I have some other minimal side effects. I get migraines, which really suck, but and then some muscle tightness and stuff like that. But overall, I'm doing very well.
Since you've been put on Tysabri, have you ever had an instance like your first one when you basically lost feeling in a large part of your body, or has that's helped that?
Yeah, totally. That helped that. I had a what they call a pseudo relapse where you have a reemergence of symptoms, but they were symptoms that you already had. So there was a few days where I lost feeling in my hands again,
Mhm.
but that came back, and I had a couple other days where there's some vision issues, but nothing lasted longer than 24 hours.
Oh, that's good.
So yeah, I've been very fortunate.
Hmm. And I'm glad that Tysabri is still working for you. For being on
Yeah.
that drug, I liked being on that drug.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, it didn't work for me, but I'm glad that you're getting success with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's huge side effects with this drug, right? Especially someone like me who's been on it for so long.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been very fortunate that
Yeah.
it has worked well for me.
Hmm.
Um, so just to let you know about a few of the other things that had kind of happened when I got diagnosed. So because of the issues with my numbness and tingling, I kind of lost my balance.
Hmm.
So I ended up having to go to physio initially, and then I had a roommate when I was diagnosed, and I wasn't always coping very well, and she kind of got the brunt of that, unfortunately. But that really made me realize that I needed to go see some help, get some. I did some counseling,
Hmm.
really important, because I wasn't coping well initially, so I really needed some support.
Hmm.
So luckily, I have. Being a nurse, I had some benefits that I was able to tap into and get seen. Um, yeah, so some other fun things.
Yeah. So generally, right now, you're doing quite well from being on the medication. You don't have any symptoms that you have every day, except for your eye issue, which you kind of just sort of ignore. It seems like your other eye works good, so you just go with that.
Yeah, unless
Yeah.
I get
So,
my migraines.
yeah.
Unfortunately, I have weird migraines and that they last for like a month or two at a time.
Hey.
So, I mean, it's not always migraine level, but
Yeah.
it's there for quite some time.
Um, is there any ways that you're involved at all with the MS Society? Do you do anything with them, volunteer, participate in anything?
Yeah, I do a bit. I did the MS Walk last year. I did some fundraising with that, and I've done that for a couple of other years as well. I'm just starting to try to get involved.
Yeah.
It's so when I was initially diagnosed, I was working and just
Mhm.
really needed some time to cope. Um,
Yes.
did tap into like the peer support,
Mhm.
the one-to-one peer support, which I found quite helpful
Mhm.
initially. Was involved here with a peer support group as
Mhm.
well that's run through the MS Society, as you
Mhm.
know, since
Mhm.
you're also a part of that.
Yes.
And yeah, so I'm getting in there.
Mhm.
Um, I was also for a long time I was a student and full
Yes.
time working. So now
Yes.
I'm finished school again, and I'm like, okay, cool. Now I have some more time. I should start doing some of the things I really want to do, which is try to talk more about MS and
Mhm.
be more involved in that community. Hmm.
I understand you told me that you're involved in some research. Can you explain that to me and what is it you do? What is it for? Just basically the whole thing about that.
So while I was doing my master's, I was involved with the Joanna Briggs Institute, which is a systematic review. It's an organization that supports systematic reviews. So I did some what we call JBI training and was encouraged to do a systematic review. So I did start one. So I did what they call a systematic review protocol. I had a team that supported me, luckily. And the name of the review was called Coping Experiences of Young Adults Diagnosed with a Chronic Illness.
Mhm.
Um, Qualitative systematic review protocol. So I was lucky to get some support to do that. And what I was really trying to get at is that, I mean, I was diagnosed at the age 25. So that puts me in a weird position in terms of my stages of life.
Mhm.
So there's just like depending on where you get when you get diagnosed in your life, you cope differently. So
Yes.
I was in a stage of my life where and anybody between the ages of 19 to 30 are in this emerging adult
Mhm.
stage. And what that means is that you're trying to figure out your life, trying to figure out a career, your future, you're trying to find a partner to settle down with, of course, if that's what you want. But in my case, that was, I wanted a future. I wanted to figure out my career, all of those types of things.
Mhm.
So when you get a chronic illness diagnosis during that stage of life, it impacts you so much. You don't have the support that you have if you get diagnosed as a teenager. You often have your parents to help support
Right.
you through that, help figure out the healthcare system.
Mhm.
Healthcare it can be really challenging to navigate.
Mhm.
And so I really wanted to advocate not only for myself, but to try to support others who are going through this diagnosis,
Mhm.
because they have such a different experience. Because if you think about someone who's also diagnosed when they're like 50, they've had a career, they've had children. It doesn't impact the way that they live their life for the most part.
Mhm.
I mean, and I'm not sorry, I don't want to dismiss them. What I'm trying to say is that for the most part, their life trajectory is going to stay the same. They're going to accommodate their illness
Mhm.
and work with it.
Mhm.
But as a young adult, it made me question, how am I going to live? What is my life going to look like in 10 years? And
Mhm.
I don't know the answer to that
Yeah.
question,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the hardest thing about MS, is that there's this fear of the unknown, because at any time you can have a relapse and that can impact you in so many ways.
Mhm.
Um, like my initial one, it just, it took away my balance. I had very little vision. I wasn't able to work for a few months.
Mhm.
So it was challenging. And what do you do with that?
Right.
So it's all of what I wanted to understand is how people cope when they have a chronic illness. What
Mhm.
are some of those things that they need, and how we can better support them during that process? Because
Right.
as I talked about, I really needed some counseling. So I
Right.
went and got that, and I was able to seek and advocate for myself and get the resources I
Right.
needed. So I'm hoping my supervisor at Dow, I did that through Dalhousie. My supervisor there has put it forth to try to get another student to take over and
Mhm.
to be help support it.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, now that I've graduated and have started a new job, it has been really hard to meet those academic
Yeah.
needs, along with my new position. So
Mhm.
I'm really hoping that someone will take that up and just start to really help support this population.
Yeah, hopefully someone does.
Yeah, I mean, if another student at Dalhousie picks it up, I'll still be there to support them.
Right.
So they'll still have my perspective, which is
Right.
someone with a chronic illness. So that's like good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And understand that you published a paper based on your research.
Yeah. So as part of the process, I did publish that systematic review
Mhm.
protocol called Coping with a Chronic Illness, coping experiences of young adults diagnosed with a chronic illness, a
Mhm.
qualitative systematic review protocol. So that did get published by the Joanna Briggs Institute.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's very preliminary, and basically the point of publishing that was to prove that there is a need to do this systematic review, and the next stage will be to do that. So I'm hoping that in the next year or two I'll be able to get to help support that and get
Right.
back to it. People
Yeah.
don't know how to be their own advocate. They don't know
Yeah.
how to push the system. So I was really lucky that I had that skill set from
Yeah.
being a nurse,
Right.
where I had to learn to advocate for all of
Yeah.
my patients and their needs.
Yeah.
And so I had to really embody that skill
Yeah.
and take it to my own personal life and be
Yeah.
like, yo, I need some help. Something's
Right.
going on with me. And every time I see people in terms of healthcare, I have to, continue to advocate for
Mhm.
myself
Yeah.
to get what I need. I mean, and that's just part of it, unfortunately. But yeah, definitely chronic disease management. Um, and like, yeah, because I guess so sorry, this is as in trying to be my own advocate, I see multiple practitioners. So I have my family doctor, I have the MS clinic, and then I
Yeah.
have an ophthalmologist as
Yeah.
well. So, and they don't all talk to each other, so I really
Right.
have to make sure that everyone is aware of all of my issues and is managing me as a team.
Mhm.
I'm really lucky that I have that skill set, that I can do that and advocate
Right.
for myself. I'll go back to the MS clinic if I need something in relation to my MS.
Mhm.
And I'll do that I'll ask those questions, ask those hard questions,
Yeah.
push for myself. And some people don't know how to do that because it's not a skill that they developed at this
Right.
point. So it's super important, but I was just really fortunate to already have that skill set as a nurse.
Yeah, because a lot of people, it takes them a number of years to find their voice, advocate for themselves. So, but you have to learn definitely how to do that.
Yeah,
If you
exactly.
don't, if you don't work or didn't go to school in certain fields where you're involved with it, definitely.
Yeah, or if you don't have someone that you trust to
Right.
help you along that journey too, right?
Right.
So that's an important thing too, is just to have that person that you trust
Yeah,
to do. So I have
exactly.
this little really hilarious story from when I was going through my initial relapse. So my friend and I were walking downtown. I mean, clearly I'm struggling with my emotions and things like that. So he was like just trying to cheer me up, which was lovely of him.
Mhm.
So we were walking downtown Halifax on the boardwalk. And like between like by the bicycle thief there's like a fountain, but it like only comes up intermittently. It's like
Mhm.
kind of like a splash pad vibe.
Yeah.
So we were walking and there was this cute little girl playing in the fountain. So, I have no vision in my left eye. So I turn my head to look past my friend and I'm like looking at this little girl and she's just so cute, brings big smile to my face. And I'm just like still walking along, not really thinking anything of it because, I haven't got used to having no peripheral vision yet.
Right.
And then all of a sudden my friend like puts his hand out in front of me. He's like, Beth, stop. Because I was almost about to run into a sign. Would have got clotheslined by the sign.
Wow.
I know. It was really hilarious. We both started laughing. He still bugs me about it to this day, just because he thinks it's the most funny thing.
Yes.
But like, just had no awareness because when you first like lose your peripheral vision, you're like, what the heck?
Yes.
Luckily, I have it back now, but it's like,
I'm glad you weren't by yourself because
right?
you would have ran into the sign and
Oh yeah,
then,
and would have had like concussion, would have
yeah,
fallen right
strangers
back.
would have had to come to help you,
Oh
probably. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
That is pretty hilarious, actually.
Right?
I'm
It's a
glad
really
you didn't actually run into the sign because that would have been even worse for you. You would end up back at the hospital for something else going on, which you didn't need.
definitely didn't need that at the
Yeah.
time. But anyways, it's really funny.
You mentioned that we just a few
Yeah.
seconds ago about the fear. Do you want to tell me a little bit about the fear that you had? Because I know a lot of people with MS, there's fear. It doesn't matter, I feel like if you've just been diagnosed or you've been dealing with it for 20 years because stuff can just come up. Do you just want to touch on that a little bit?
Sure, no problem. So I was talking about so my initial relapse because it was really quite aggressive. I
Mhm.
mean, I started having symptoms. I remember dates, May 16th,
Mhm.
and I had my first IV steroid on June 16th.
Mhm.
So between that 1 month period,
Mhm.
my symptoms were really aggressive.
Mhm.
Um, you know, so what happened, especially when I started losing my vision, is I became afraid because every morning when I woke up, something else was gone.
Mhm.
A little bit more of my vision, a little bit more of my feeling sensation was gone. So, I started to become afraid to go to sleep, started to become afraid to wake up.
Mhm.
Um, and then during that first initial year, while I was after I had, come out of my initial relapse, anytime a symptom popped up, I talked about those pseudo relapses. So
Yeah.
anytime I had a symptom, I was like immediately so fearful of what was going to happen.
Mhm.
I still catch myself
Yeah.
sometimes being afraid when I wake up. Am
Mhm.
I okay today?
Yeah.
What has happened? Because, the day I woke up and had no vision
Mhm.
was really hard.
Mhm. I can
So,
imagine. Actually, I can't imagine what that'd be like. I
right?
imagine it would be very scary, but I personally have no idea what that'd be like.
Yeah, it was so fear. And I think
Yes.
that was why I really needed some counseling
Yes.
to help me cope with that fear
Yeah.
that I had. I really had to learn to live for the now, to be
Yeah.
present in my life, to just keep going no matter what. So I'm lucky that I have that
Mhm.
uh, passion and that drive in my life that I just can keep going.
Right.
But definitely something that I really struggled with
Yeah.
initially was that fear
Yeah.
of. what is MS going to do to my
Mhm.
life? And
Yeah. Yeah.
happy that I've been able to move past that and
Right.
keep going.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. What would you tell someone, or what advice would you give someone who is diagnosed today with MS? If you can think of anything.
The biggest thing I think is that I know that a lot of people are struggling because like their symptoms, at first symptoms of MS can be quite different and not consistent. So definitely keep advocating for yourself.
Mhm.
There are lots of resources out there. So if you think you need something, you really need to push for that. There's,
Mhm.
the MS Society has really great navigators to
Mhm.
help you with that. If you don't know where to go, you can always call them. And there's other like peer support groups that you can join to help. Initially I really felt alone in my MS journey because I didn't know anybody who had been diagnosed so young like
Yeah.
me. It wasn't until I joined the group with you guys that
Mhm.
I really um, felt like there was other people. I mean, I turned to literature a lot. I read a lot of books
Mhm.
about different people's stories, and it,
Yes.
it really just helped me feel not alone.
Mhm.
And that's another big thing. People aren't alone in this. There's lots of people who have MS
Mhm.
and have had similar journeys. So even though you might have different symptoms, it's really nice to have a supportive group that
Mhm.
you can turn to and get some support from.
Thank you very much
No problem.
for joining me on here today.